Chapter 21. Krista faces Hexus. Krista saw Batty fall. She flew down to where he lay under the twisted steel, but there was nothing she could do to help him.
No!
She cried, trying to stop the tears, because there was no time for tears right now. She was in danger of being hit by the hail of flying metal that Hexus was blowing about him as he ripped into the leveler. By now, the clouds of thick smoke made it almost impossible to breathe. Most of the trees were down, and hundreds of forest creatures lay dead or dying. Krista vowed she would destroy Hexus, even if it meant her life, for without the forest, she might as well be dead. She dug into her magic pouch and took out the seed Magiloon had given her. It glowed in her hand, and she remembered Magiloon telling her that the love she felt for this forest would give her a strength Hexus knew nothing about. As she held the seed, she knew she must now tap into her own hidden power. The glowing seed reminded her of the magic she shared with all life, and as this feeling grew, she felt close to Magiloon. She could almost see her floating at her side. And with that thought, hundreds of fairies suddenly appeared and fluttered around her. Hexus was still charging at the leveler in his vain attempts to start it. He stopped every now and again to suck on the exhaust pipes, and when nothing came out of them, his rage increased. He was working himself into a terrible temper now that his fuel supply had evaporated. At the height of his fury, he smashed the leveler to pieces. Then rose up in a gigantic column of concentrated evil and raged above what was left of the canopy.
It's not over yet.
Together we can stop him,
said Krista, as more fairies and elves rallied around her. But none of them expected the wild whirlwind that suddenly sucked them all high into the air. Hexus had extended an arm out of his swirling body of poisonous clouds and shredded the rest of the canopy. Then he inhaled his own angry billowing fumes. With every breath he took, he created a whirlwind of destruction. He was blowing himself up to terrifying proportions, preparing for his final attack.
You've tried to stop me once before,
he screamed, scorching the trees with every harsh word.
And now you are about to learn that I am the most powerful force in existence. Now that I've been freed, nothing can stop me from destroying until there's nothing left to destroy. Goodbye, forest. Goodbye, fairies!
Krista knew this was her last chance. So when Hexus inhaled again, she acted. Instead of fighting against the intake of air, she streaked towards him, dodging the flying debris that was being sucked through the air. As she flew towards Hexus, a ray of sunshine zapped through the dark clouds and struck the seed in her outstretched hand. The seed suddenly sprouted. Then before Hexus knew what had happened, she'd flown into his open mouth and disappeared. He'd swallowed both Krista and the magic seed. Hexus billowed above Old High Rise, coughing and spluttering as he choked on this unexpected mouthful. He roared in pain as the seed started to grow inside him. He bellowed out his anger when a vine burst out of the top of his head. He inhaled and puffed himself up, but this only accelerated the growth of the seed, and more vines shot out of his body. The seed was growing at a magical rate. It was growing into a strangler fig tree. The vines exploding out of Hexus thickened into steely tendrils and took root. Hexus reared up against them, but they pulled him down. Roaring at the top of his voice, he dragged himself through the devastated forest, trying to break loose. But he was grounded, and there was nothing he could do about it. The air vibrated with his fury, as Hexus battled against the power of nature. He fought and struggled with all his might, but with every contortion he bent himself into increasingly ugly shapes. He was being strangled by the tree inside him. He tried to shrink himself and wriggle free, but the vine roots had meshed together so tightly that he couldn't escape. Soon his voice was only a muffled roar. Zack and Pip stood side by side as they watched the strangler fig grow and grow and grow until it towered above the torn canopy. Now, there was hardly any sign of Hexus at all. Only the faintest outline of his face was frozen forever, way up in the massive tree trunk. When the tree finally stopped growing, Zack and Pips ran towards it. Pips flew around it, looking for some sign of Krista. Zack hunted around the newly formed roots. "Down here!" shouted Zack, disappearing into a hollow beneath the buttressed roots. Pips joined him, and they found Krista curled up in a tight ball, carefully tucked up and protected by the root system of the tree. "Oh, Chris, please wake up!" Pips cried. He lifted her up in his arms and kissed her gently. To his surprise, she opened her eyes and smiled up at him. He carried her out of the tree, and everyone cheered when they saw her. Frogs leapt in the air, and even the serious snakes grinned.
Is that a party I hear?
Yelled Granny Belladonna, peering out of old high-rise. "It sure is, Granny," shouted Pips. "Krista is safe, Hexus is dead, and the leveler has been destroyed. Everyone can come out now."
Oh my goodness!
cried Rose Myrtle, fluttering out of old high-rise.
Whatever happened to our forest?
There was much rejoicing now that the battle was over, and Krista was honored for her bravery. But it was also a sad time for everyone. Their beautiful forest was in ruins, and so many lives had been lost. Among the fallen trees and debris, there were also many injured animals. Pips organized flocks of birds to lift them to safety, while Blackbeak worked with Ock and Rock to turn the soil carefully in the search for missing friends. Magiloon and Batty were gone, and Drags had died in the beech tree circle. Wokia and Knot were alive, but badly injured. Zack felt dreadful. He knew he should have warned them about the logging camp at the edge of the forest, but he'd never dreamed it could so quickly lead to this sort of destruction. Krista sat beside him and held his hand as the last of the dark clouds blew away. She knew how he felt. His pain was her pain too.
You risked your life for us. You belong here, Zack. You're a part of us now.